October 31st, Part 2. "I like the world just the way it is," said the Count. "Pray, let us begin." The vicar nodded. "We shall, to its proper conclusion, with a gate thrown wide." The Count tossed a twig and a small parcel into the flames. The fire moved in its colorful dance, crackling and chiming, burning a hole in the night, through which voices now chanting emerged. Shadows constantly moved past us, over the altar, across the face of the stone. I heard the howl again, much nearer. I looked at the vicar and saw him flinch, but he straightened and performed an opening gesture. He spoke a word of power, deeply, slowly. It hung in the air and resonated afterwards. The inscription on the stone began to grow a little more brightly, and now, very faintly, I could discern the formation of the door-like rectangle come to frame it. That configuration which earlier had sucked Greymalk and me through to our Dreamworld adventure. The vicar repeated the word, and the rectangle came clear. With the chanting, I could now hear the faint Shub Nugrath being repeated, as if in response. Ahead of me, Greymalk had risen to her feet and was standing very stiffly. The vicar turned then. Rather than proceeding to the next phase, he moved slowly to the cloth on which the sacrificial blade rested. To his rear, I noted the icon had begun to glow. He knelt. He raised the blade with both hands, bringing it to his lips and kissing it. Then he rose and turned towards the altar, Tikla still on his shoulder. And then there came a movement from my right, beyond Jack and the Count. Another dark shape was moving to join us. The vicar had taken but a single step ahead when a great gray wolf moved into the firelight and rushed past him to the altar. Larry Talbot had arrived, apparently in reasonable control of his faculties. He seized hold of the girl's left shoulder with his teeth and dragged her down from the altar. With that rapid backing motion I'd seen him employ before, he dragged her quickly before us towards the north, whence he'd come, now to my right. The report of a gunshot filled the air, and Larry staggered. Bam! A dark blot appearing and spreading high upon his left shoulder. The vicar held a smoking revolver pointed in his direction. Larry continued moving almost immediately. However, the vicar fired again. Bam! This time the blood was on top of Larry's head, and he uttered a moaning sound as his jaws fell open and Lynette dropped to the ground. Larry slumped forward then. The shiftings of the firelight and the shadow swam over him. The chanting continued, Shub Niggurath, against a strange music. The vicar pulled the trigger again. There followed a clicking sound from the pistol, but no discharge. Immediately he drew it near and worked the hammer. Suddenly, as he released it, there was a sharp report as the round kicked up the dirt in the south end of the altar. Bam! The vicar hurled the weapon to the ground. Perhaps having cast only 3 rounds? Homemade bullets. "Get her back to the altar," the vicar ordered. Morse McCabe immediately departed their positions and moved towards the supine girl. Larry's sides were still heaving heavily, and his eyes were closed. There was a lot more blood on his head, on his neck, on his shoulder now. "Stop," the Count said. "Stop," the Count said. "Prayers are forbidden to move a sacrifice once the ceremony is in progress." The vicar stared at him. Morse and McCabe halted. "I've never heard of such a restriction," the vicar said. "It's part of the tradition," Jack stated. "There must always be a small, even if only symbolic, exit open to the sacrifice in this. They may go as far as they can. They may be stopped. The place where they fall becomes the new altar. Do otherwise and you destroy the pattern we've created. The results could be disastrous." The vicar pondered for a moment, then said, "I don't believe you. You're outnumbered. It's a closer's bluff to make things more awkward for me. Morris, MacLeod, put her back. The Count stepped forward as they advanced. In a case such as this, the opposing parties are permitted to resist the desecration. I heard heavy, clamping footsteps in the distance, but they seemed to be passing the hill rather than approaching it. Morris and MacLeod had hesitated, but they were now moving forward. Reaching for Lynette, the Count flowed forward. Not a single limb seemed to stir, but he was there beside them. Then he raised his arms out to the side, his cloak dependent there, and he moved them forward, completely engulfing the men within his folds. He stood thus for only an instant, arms across his chest, before a succession of snapping sounds could be heard. He opened his arms, and they fell to earth. They lay at odd angles, blood emerging from their ears, noses, and mouths. Their eyes were wide. They did not breathe. "You dare!" the vicar cried. "You dare to touch my people!" The Count turned his head slowly, raising his arms again. "You presume to address me so?" He flowed towards the vicar, but much more slowly. The music came clearer and clearer, the chanting louder, the inscription brighter, and as he moved I beheld a silent form in the shadows to my right. A form whose presence had first reached me in the form of his scent, which I recognized from an encounter in the wood by moonlight. He approached soundlessly. The stranger wolf. The vicar's hand snaked out from beneath his cloak, casting something towards the Count. Immediately, the flowing ceased and the Count stiffened. In the meantime, shielded from the vicar's view by the Count's body, the stranger wolf entered the firelight, took hold of Lynette's shoulder, and continued what Larry had begun, dragging her back into the darkness. The Count was suddenly less than graceful. He swayed. He took an awkward step towards the vicar, whose hands dipped beneath his own cloak to emerge and repeat whatever he'd done. What is it?" the Count asked, reeling towards the victor, who retreated before him. Then the Count fell. "Dirt from one of your own caskets," the vicar replied, "mixed with pieces of my church's altar stone relic. A relic left over from more Papish times. Fingerbone of St. Hilarion, according to the records. You require your consecrated soil, but over-consecration is like the difference between therapeutic and debilitating doses of strychnine. Do you not agree?" The Count muttered a reply in a foreign language, and the wolf disappeared with Lynette. I realized that from all his talks with Larry, plus his knowledge of drugs and the samples he had obtained, he had succeeded several days ago in developing his own ideal dosage. I had just witnessed the great detective's greatest disguise yet. I howled a "well done" into the night, and later, a good luck came back to me. The inscriptions glowed brilliantly now. Whether the deaths of Morris and MacLeod had contributed to this was hard to tell. The vicar looked up and saw that Lynette was gone. He glared at Jill. "You should have told me." "I didn't notice until now," she replied. "Neither did I," said Nightwing. The vicar picked up the sacrificial knife, which he had dropped, moved back to his position, and drove the blade into the ground at his feet. He straightened then, repeated that word of power, and then said another. Immediately, his face became snouted, the tusked visage of a boar with a threaded ear. This lasted for perhaps a minute before Larry's eyes opened. He turned his head, saw Lynette was gone, looked immediately to the altar, saw she was not there either. He tried to rise, failed. I wondered how serious his condition was. True, there was a lot of blood, but head wounds are often that way. Even a silver bullet has to hit something major. Larry tried to crawl forward, succeeding in moving perhaps half a foot. Paused and panted. The vicar spoke another word. Greymalk was suddenly striped like a small tiger. This too passed. Tikla was starting to look like a vulture. Suddenly Jill was an ancient hag bent far forward, hooked nose almost touching her jutting chin, strands of white hair hanging about her face. I glanced at Jack. I saw he suddenly wore the shaggy head of a great brown bear. Yellow eyes staring forward, saliva running down from the corners of his mouth. Looking downward, I saw my fur was blood red and moist. I felt as if horns jutted from my brow. I had no idea what I might resemble, but Greymalk drew back in alarm. The boar spoke again. The word rang like a bell in the chill air. The Count was suddenly a skeleton wrapped in black. Something unseen passed high overhead, laughing like a demented child. Pale mushrooms sprang up all about us, and a shifting of breezes brought to me a sulphurous scent from the fire. A green liquid flowed outward from that blaze, spreading in bubbling streams. The chanting now seemed to contain all of our names. MacCab had become a woman whose painted face began to peel off in long strips. Beside him, Morris was now an ape, his long hairy arms reaching to the ground. He leaned to rest upon his knuckles. His mouth opened wide, showing an enormous expanse of teeth and gums. Larry was now a bleeding man sprawled upon the ground. The air before us shimmered and became a mirror, giving the entire prospect back to us. Then our reflected heads detached themselves and drifted leftwards. It was a strange feeling, passing out of one into another, for I seemed unmoved, though I felt the sudden weight of the bear head. I saw the hogs drift by the settle on the Jack's shoulders. Greymalk suddenly wore an overlarge head, horned and demonic. Jill, a small striped cat's head, and so on along our crescent. The body shifted in the night, and I was a cat with a bear's head, lying flat because of its weight. My heart thudded like a steam engine. Jack had become a boar-headed demon, and again the laughter rang from overhead. If I were not my body or my head, what was I, sprawled there amid the mushrooms and the stench? Another wave of chanting rolling in my ears. Illusion. It must be illusion, mustn't it? A shooting star cut past a blood-red moon. Another. And another. Soon, multitudes of them rained down out of the heavens. The mirror cracked. Jack and I stood alone at our end. Our forms returned to us as a great gust of wind out of the north blew away the haze. I felt a familiar tingling in the air. The time had come for the opening. I glanced at Jack and could tell that he felt it too. Larry dragged himself another foot forward. I was looking at the vicar as he spoke the final word, and I saw the Count's left hand twitch, but apparently the vicar did too, and he stooped and raised the pentacle. Something dark fled forth from the Count's ring, but the vicar caught it in the pentacle bowl, and it was reflected off into the night. It's probably too late for killing the man anyhow, for the opening was definitely beginning. The vicar stooped again, raised the icon, and placed it upon the Count's chest. The ring did not flare again. All in all, I regarded both Larry and the Count, and I was forced to a sort of grudging respect for the fellow. He was much better at his business than I'd have guessed. "Jill," he called, "use the wand now." Jill reached inside her cloak and produced the wand and raised it. Oddly, the growing brightness of the stone halted for a moment. Jack had his wand out in an instant, raising it and training it upon the same target. I heard heavy footsteps again, this time approaching us. I glanced at Jack. Beads of perspiration had formed upon his brow. I could tell he was pouring his will and his spirit into the wand, but the opening continued. The experiment man lumbered upon us. "Pretty kitty," he said, pausing in front of Jack, which might have killed anyone else, but he'd already smelled of death and seemed aware of nothing untoward. Suddenly the opening was arrested, and the gateway lost some of its depth. The experiment man stooped and quickly snatched up Greymalk. "Pretty kitty," he repeated. Then he turned and walked away in the direction whence he'd come. "Put me down!" she cried. "I can't leave now!" He sat down just beyond the firelight and commenced petting her. Larry continued his crawl. Steady now. Depth returned to the gateway. I thought I saw a tentacle stir within it. There was something large and amorphous that seemed to be drifting our way. "This isn't working well," I heard a small voice say. I sought its source. Bubbo's head had emerged from the left side pocket of Jack's coat. "Bubbo, what are you doing here?" I asked. "I had to see it, to learn whether or not it was right. Not so sure." Yes, it was a tentacle extending from the dark, approaching mass, reaching for the gateway. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I'm a pack rat," he said. "Thought you were outnumbered and outgunned, and I wanted your side to win. So I did the only thing that I knew how." "What?" I asked, already beginning to guess. The dark mass was much nearer. I smelled a deep reptilian musk. The experiment man had put down gray milk and had risen. He was approaching us again. Larry moved further to my left, and a tentacle emerged from that gateway, groped about, located Morris's right foot, wrapped about it, and dragged him back inside. A moment later, it returned from a cab. Slurping sounds followed. "I fixed it so they'd defeat themselves after they disposed of you." "How?" There was great masses of tentacles now, all of them writhing towards the gateway. "I sneaked about last night," Bubbo said, "and I switched the wands." I seemed to hear the odd sounds of a cat's laughter. It's so hard to tell when they're smiling. The old cat hadn't been telling me to fetch a stick. Carpe baculum. Seize the wand. I sprang into the air, catching it with my teeth, twisting it out of Jack's grip. I could see the astonished expression on his face as I did so. A terrible wind began to blow past us. I heard the vicar cry, "No!" Tecula sprang up from his shoulders, wings beating. Turning my head, I saw that the gateway was closing. There followed a roar Growler would have been proud of as Larry leaped up at the vicar. They rolled on the ground, passing right over the Count, knocking the icon from his breast. Then the mighty wind caught them, and they were carried towards the closing gateway and on through it. Jill looked puzzled as she continued to wield the closing wand, hair and cloak streaming forward. Jack had braced himself. Then his arm moved, his hand dripping into the satchel and out, emerging quickly, casting a wine bottle of Slitherers into the gateway to gunk it up. He grinned at me. "Any old port in a storm," he observed. I felt the wind pushing me forward. Nightwind was trying to get behind a rock. The experimentman came up and halted before us. The pressure suddenly eased. "Count?" he asked. Had Grey Milk sent him after our ally? "The man on the ground," I said. "Take him away." He continued past us. Holding his own against the wind, he scooped and caught hold of the supine figure and raised it up in his arms. I glanced at the gateway. It had already grown somewhat darker. The fire, scattered, flamed at about a dozen small points. It glowed from many more. A few of those faded and winked out as I watched. Jill stared at the wand she held, and I could read the realization coming into her expression. I heard Grey Malk's voice come from the shadows. "Come on! Let's get out of here!" Bubbo had already dug back out of sight into Jack's pocket as we moved to take her advice. A single note, as of a crushed crystal goblet, filled the air. The stone was blank again. Abruptly, the wind ceased. The voices had already died away. We made our way northward, towards the slope, and overhead, the moon seemed enormous. I turned and looked back in time to see the experiment man start down the southern slope, carrying the Count. "Hi, cat," I said. "I'll buy you that drink yet." "Hi, dog," she said. "I think I'll let you." Jack and Jill went down the hill. Gray and I ran after.